We had been checking weather reports tirelessly for 2 weeks until we finally found our spot, so we tentatively decided that to be our slot. Our small crew consisted of me and my friends Josie and Frank. Josie's dad owned the boat, and he still needed to sign off on our plan, so we had to reserve it ahead of time and make sure that we got it back in pristine condition, on the dot, and preferably with a nice coating of wax, or whatever they use to make boats shine like candied apples. Monday arrived and the weather was still solid, and Josie's dad had reluctantly signed off on our plan, so we decided not to wait any longer and take it out the next day. The idea was to have a 2-day mini-cruise, just us hanging out on the boat and maybe docking it for the night at a nearby town. Although Josie's dad was a hard-ass, he had taught her how to drive and maintain the boat since she was a kid. So really, the worst thing that could happen is that we wouldn't have enough snacks. Me and Frank met at the parking lot and saw Josie standing on the boat at the end of the dock. Her dad was with her, lecturing her about some winch or other. Josie rolling her eyes next to him, barely maintaining her attention. "You really can't leave her alone even for a couple days, can he?" Frank asked, keeping his voice low as we stepped on the long dock. "Josie or the boat?" Frank chuckled, then quickly returned his resting poker face as we reached the boat, Josie's dad turning around as he heard the planks creaking under our feet. Before he could say anything, Josie ran up from behind him and said, "Hey boys, you brought the food and snacks and 5 gallons of vodka, I assume?" "Aye, aye, Captain," we replied in unison. It was Josie's dad's turn to roll his eyes. "Well, I'll leave you to it," he said to Josie, starting to walk down the small ramp down to the docks. "And remember, 2 days, no more. I expect you to bring her back in one piece." "Sure thing, Dad." That was Josie's way of saying, yes, 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 I get it already. Josie's dad gave us a stern look, followed by a slight nod as he walked past us. He never really liked me or Frankie, a bunch of hooligans, as he'd once called us when we were kids. For the record, me and Frankie didn't like the guy either, so at least the feeling was mutual. After her dad was out of earshot, Josie yelled, "Are you ready, kids?" putting on her damnedest pirate voice. "Aye, aye, Captain," we strained and sprinted up the ramp into the boat. After an exchange of hugs, we unloaded our goodies into the mini-fridge below deck, then met up with Josie, who was already sitting inside the helm. "Ready to leave, crew?" she asked. "Let's rock this boat," Frank replied. The amount of bad jokes this early in the morning was surely a great indication for what the rest of the day held. It wasn't long until the shore behind us was gone, a tranquil, open sea spreading out in all directions. Josie seemed to know where we were going, but at that point I could no longer discern what direction we had even come from. Me and Frank sunbathed and joked around on the deck until Josie emerged from her cocoon-like cockpit. "Sorry to interrupt your hilarious hijinks, but I'd propose we have some lunch soon." Like destiny, the word lunch produced a unified grumble from both me and Frank's stomachs. The universal horn of yes please, food please, now please. "We can stay here for a little while, then we could start heading towards the town," Josie said. Feeling bad that she was doing all the heavy lifting, I asked her, "You need any help? It's your boat, and us your honored guests, so don't be afraid to command us, Captain." "Please," Josie replied. "When I get a chance to drive this boat, I take it. Dad's been hogging it like crazy all summer. Besides, it's not like you guys even know what half of the things on this boat are called, let alone what they're used for." "Well, that's the driver's seat," Frank said, pointing at the helm. "That's called a helm, my dear. Frank, you just earned yourself the honorary job of heating up our lunch." "This ain't no Ford Prius, I see," he replied as he got up and started to take lazy strides towards below deck. "Toyota," I said. What? Prius is Toyota, not Ford. Come on, let's go make lunch for the captain. I got up to follow Frank, nodding approvingly to Josie. We had cheap microwave meals for lunch, seeing as the boat didn't have a stovetop or an oven. For some reason, maybe it was the soothing sound of the ocean lazily slapping the boat, or the warm afternoon sun, the food defied its low expectations and tasted great. Afterwards, we had a little siesta where I almost fell asleep until Josie said, "Shall I take course towards the town then?" Through a straw hat laid across his face, Frank mumbled, "Aye, aye." "You sure you don't need any help?" I asked Josie once again, but she was already jumping into the helm, excited to get back at it. "You guys just take a chill. I'll get us where we need to go." As the motor's soothing hum returned, I got myself a bag of chips and sat on the deck, watching the horizon. Frank still had the hat on his face, which either meant that he didn't want to be bothered, or that he'd fallen asleep. Either way, I was happy to just sit under the sun as the boat slowly rolled towards our destination, cutting a line into the flaccid water behind us. "Shit, shit, shit!" Josie screamed. I must have fallen asleep, and as I got up, the half-eaten bag of chips crushed under my foot. "What, Josie, what's wrong?" "What's going on?" Frank parroted as he stood up, that hat falling beside him. "There's a fucking storm coming," Josie said as she frantically pressed buttons, her eyes darting across the dashboard of the helm. I turned around and looked at the horizon. Dread filled me as I saw an infinitely wide wall of dark clouds spreading across the sky, making contact with the water in a misty gray curtain. I noticed that the ocean was no longer level, for it was rippled with small waves that thumped against the boat in eager anticipation. "I thought it was supposed to be nothing but clear skies," Frank said. He'd walked beside me, taking in the horror beyond the horizon. "Ex-fucking-actly, Sherlock. It came out of fucking nowhere," Josie snapped, holding the wheel tightly in her right hand as she fiddled something with her left. "Okay, Josie, I know this might sound stupid, but bear with. Why are we going towards the storm?" I asked, trying not to seem disingenuous as I turned around to face her. She gave a sigh, stopping what she was doing and looked me in the eyes. "That's where the town is. It's the closest place to dock right now, and the storm's moving faster than any I've ever seen. If we go back, it'll catch up to us, and we're fucked. If we go through it, we'll spend the least amount of time inside it, giving us at least a chance." "A chance at what?" Frankie asked. "A chance at getting out of here." "Any port in a storm, I guess," I said, trying to lighten the mood, to which Frank gave me a concerned look. The air had turned cool, so I went and changed to warmer clothing, Frank doing the same. Coming back up to the deck, I saw that the storm had moved closer. A lot closer. Josie instructed us to put on life jackets and to stay below deck, not to come out unless she asked us to. We put on the puffy orange jackets and promptly hunkered down below deck. The increasing waves were already rocking the boat uneasily. "Are we gonna die?" Frank asked, his voice whimpering as he looked up at me from the opposite bench. Although the question had already burrowed itself into my mind as well, I replied, No, man. We're not gonna die. Like Josie said, it's just a quick ride through, and we're back on dry land," hoping that my words held even a sliver of truth. In a matter of minutes, the sky turned dark and the boat started jumping on waves like a roller coaster rapidly going up and down, up and down. The rain tore into the boat like a machine gun as thunder sounded from across the way, lightning flashing the sky white erratically. Frank's lunch quickly escaped his stomach, coming out in an arc of brownish-green vomit that splattered across my legs and the floor. I was too scared to care, and he was too frightened to apologize. The storm kept getting worse, the waves becoming larger, as evidenced by the deeper dives and longer ascensions. Water was constantly slamming the deck, some of it trickling down to our feet. Through the 2 small windows the cabin had, it was near impossible to know whether we were on top of the water or under it, or which way was up or down. Although the storm was loud, I could still hear Josie cursing and screaming as she battled the waves and tried to keep us afloat, which was the only indication that she hadn't been swallowed into the depths below. Frank was sweating bullets, his face a pale white. I wasn't doing much better either. The words, "It's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay," repeating in my mind. Slowly, the storm started to ease up, the waves thinning out and the rain becoming only a slight patter. Neither Frank or I said anything, though not wanting to jinx it before we were safely back on land. Soon, the boat's rocking lessened severely, and I could see sunshine coming through the windows. "Hey guys, you okay? You can come up now," Josie yelled, her inflection hesitant but calm. Frankie apologized for the vomit as we got up and made our way up the steps. Josie was standing at the front of the deck, tumbling through her soaking wet hair with her fingers. "Holy shit. Did we just survive the fucking apocalypse?" Frank asked rhetorically, his eyes starting between me and Josie. "Josie, you okay?" I asked. Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, waving her hand like nothing abnormal had happened at all. I walked up next to her and said, "We got through it, didn't we? Now, just let's get ourselves back on land, eh?" "Yeah, well, that's the problem." "What do you mean?" "Well, look," she said, holding her hand out at the pale horizon, like she was presenting it on an invisible platter. "Where's the town?" "What do you mean, where's the town? We got through the storm, so shouldn't we be able to get through to it now?" "That's the thing. It should be right in front of us." "Where's the storm?" Frankie yelled from the back of the boat. "What do you mean, where's the storm? We just went through it," Josie yelled in annoyance, still peering at the horizon. "For fuck's sake, come here," Frank replied. Josie looked at me and rolled her eyes, and started walking towards Frank as she gave a long sigh. I followed tepidly behind her. As we reached the back of the boat, I realized what Frank had meant. There was no storm, nor clouds, or even residual waves. "What the fuck?" I exclaimed under my breath, right as Josie started sprinting around the boat, looking in all directions, her head swiveling in frantic motions, her hair throwing beads of water around like a dog drying up after a swim. A minute later, she joined us, panting, and said, "It's all just water. There's nothing on any side. We're in the middle of the fucking ocean. The storm's gone. There's nothing." Shit, Frank muttered as he started to tap his foot on the deck, holding himself in a tight hug as he shivered in his wet clothes. I turned to Josie. "Well, we shouldn't be far off from something, right? It's still day, and even with the storm, we couldn't have gone too far." I could see that Josie was tired. She looked like she had aged about 10 years in the last 20 minutes. Okay, you're right. Let me just check some things and figure out where to go." Josie left for the helm, leaving me and Frank to stare in silent horror at the lazy, blue ocean that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. After a long minute, Josie called to us. "Guys, you better come check this out." She was staring intensely at the dashboard of the helm as we arrived. "Okay, so good news or bad news? Which first?" "Good, please," Frank replied, recovered from the worst of the shivers. Okay, so the good news is, she began, still fiddling with controls as if to double check her suspicions. The boat seems to be in running condition. There's no damage to anything that would prevent us from going forward. So, what's the problem then? I asked. Check your phones. What? Me and Frank said in unison. Check if you have signal, internet, anything. Shit, Frank said. Yeah, mine too, I replied as I looked at my phone and saw that there was absolutely no signal or internet. Yeah, I don't have a signal either, just had to check. And it doesn't stop there, Josie said. Compasses, readings, all of that. It's shot. I can't navigate us anywhere. I have no idea where we are. Frank started to freak out and walked toward the front of the boat, his wet shoes squishing as he stomped angrily. Fuck, fuck, fuck! What the fuck do we do? Well, as I said, we can still move. The only question is where. I have a faint idea of where the sun was when we first headed out, and I suggest we try to mimic its movement back to the dock, Josie said to me while keeping her eye on Frank. Frank was now squatting on the deck, his hands gripping his neck as he stared down at his feet. That sounds smart. Then, if we see the storm again, we can recalibrate. We should probably be hitting land at some point, right? I said to Josie. That's my logic, at least. You with us, Frank? I asked, turning to him. Yeah, I guess that sounds smart, he replied in a solemn voice under his breath. Need any help? I asked Josie. Take care, Frank, she said quietly. The best thing we can do is stay calm. Josie revved up the engine and turned the boat around carefully as she mapped out her approximate direction. And then we left towards a horizon that was no different from the others, guided only by the sun's approximate movements. As Josie manned the wheel, me and Frank cleaned up below deck and dried our clothes. As we were finishing up, he said he'd stay below deck as he needed some time to think. Looking at the sun, the day was slowly turning to evening. It was summer, so we still had daylight for a few more hours. I went up to Josie to see how she was doing. Frank's below deck, said he needed some time to think. I don't blame him. This is indeed a bit fucked up, isn't it? Logically, we should hit land at some point, she replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her presence distant. How are you doing, Josie? You just pulled us through hell. I know you don't need help with the boat. I'm just saying, I'm here if you want to talk. Josie sighed and turned to me. Thanks. I think right now what I need is to get us safely back home. Once we're back, you can buy me a beer, and then we can talk. I nodded, and then turned my head to look at the horizon, noticing something in the distance. I said, Josie? What's that? She turned her head back to survey the ocean. In the distance, there were small, dark peaks rising from the ocean, like the tips of underwater mountains rising above the water. It appeared seemingly out of nowhere. I don't know, but I think we're going to see soon enough. I stayed with Josie as we approached the peaks. As we got closer, it was obvious that there was no land between them. Instead, they shot up from the water in thick spirals that tapered off the higher they reached. As we got closer, we could finally realize their true size. Although some were smaller than others, most were the equivalent of tall office buildings, some reaching even higher. They spiraled and twisted in the air, arcing like blades of grass in the wind. It seemed like they could fall down at any moment, but they did not move or shake in the slightest. There must have been 20 or so, and they all looked similar despite their differences in size. Dark, mostly smooth, yet also scratched, like charred meat on a grill. You have any idea what these are? They look like trees or something, except they don't have leaves or branches, I said to Josie. Never seen anything like it. Must be some rock formations or something. Maybe there's an underwater volcano that burst lava out and it's solidified? I don't really know. But those should only appear deeper in the ocean, far away from land. I heard Frank coming up the stairs. He looked better than he had before, his step lighter, although I'd been afraid he'd been brooding. I guess having some time to think really did help. As he saw the spiraling towers, his face turned into a twisted and confused half frown as he said, "What the fuck are those?" "We don't know," I replied, "but it's the only thing we've seen so far." Soon, the closest spiral towered just a mere 200 yards away, its wide shape casting upon the boat. From a distance, it had been hard to decipher the dark structures, but upon closer inspection, it was clear that their anatomy was abnormal. Stretches of surface material were mostly smooth, but all of the spirals seemed to have light scratches that were formed above the rest of the exterior. It looked like they had been bombarded by meteors of differing sizes, although, even if that had been the case, how they had not been immediately broken, I do not know. They were beyond any logic I could muster. "So, anyone know what we're looking at?" Josie asked, surprising both me and Frank. She was usually the one to know things, us just tagging along for the ride. "No clue, Captain," replied Frank as he stared upwards in dismay at the towering spiral. "Still no," I said. Suddenly, the boat's end shot up, followed by the front, ascending us a good 10 yards in mere seconds. Frank and I were knocked down on the deck, but Josie managed to hold onto the walls surrounding the helm. The boat kept rocking as waves hit us from behind. I slowly stood up with my knees bent for support, and we went to help out Frank, who was still laying on the deck, his eyes wide in panic. Once I'd gotten Frank up, Josie had already managed to make her way to the back of the boat. We held onto the railings along the boat's edge and walked as fast as we could through the oceanic turbulence to catch up with her. Once I saw what had produced those waves, I wanted to get back to land more than I ever had before. In the distance, tens more of the spirals had emerged from the ocean, some even larger than the ones we'd seen. They dripped with water, and some were covered in green algae. Somehow, they'd been quiet, merely disturbing the water as they'd shot up. "We need to move. One of those things should shoot up under the boat and sink the whole fucking thing," Josie screamed, running back inside the helm as the waves slowly calmed down and became smaller. I leaned on the railing to see if there was something underneath us. Not that there was much I could do, even if I saw a gigantic spiral shooting up from the depths. The water beneath the surface was unmoving, holding in abyssal darkness. It seemed as if the light penetrated less than it had before. And what was deep below was nothing but pitch-black shadowlands. Just as I was about to disembark and head towards Josie, something moved in the water. I craned my neck further over the railing to get a better look. It looked like two large masses were separating from each other, unearthing a ravine. Josie had gotten the boat moving, and we were starting to turn towards an opening between two of the spirals. As the boat circled, I got a better view of what lay below. The ravine widened, and inside it, I could see a dark, whitish yellow mass peeking through. As Josie cranked us up to speed, the yellow mass had opened up into a large, oval shape that seemed to span across the ocean floor. Its center held a deep, dark circle that sucked in light as if it were a black hole, twisting all things inside of it. Then it closed up. I sighed in relief, hoping that no more spirals would emerge. Suddenly, it opened up again in a furious motion, wider than before, into a perfect circle. Then it hit me. It was an eye, larger than anything I could think of. Although we were moving at full speed, it was so gargantuan that we weren't even making any headway. It blinked. "Josie? Frank!" I screamed as I turned around and saw Frank on the opposite railing looking down at the water, witnessing the same thing I was seeing. Frank turned to me. His face was a washed white and his mouth slightly agape. "They're tentacles. They're fucking tentacles. Look." He pointed at one of the bigger spirals. "They have fucking suction cups and all. Shit. As if on cue, the tentacles started to return to the water, splashing as they did so, producing strong currents in the water. The boat was immediately caught up in the chaos, going up and around huge waves, being dragged by the water's shifting volume. Frank sprang below deck, and I followed him. From the small round windows, I could see one of the gargantuan tentacles dropping back into the water, the boat just barely missing its tip and almost sunk by the shifting ocean. Josie ran inside with us and exclaimed, "The storm's back. It's fucking back. I can't maneuver the boat worth shit." As she closed the door behind her, we were flung to the side, my ribs hitting one of the cabinets, producing a painful crack. I could hear the rain start to scratch at the boat, and soon we were engulfed in darkness, the rain gunning down on us through the waves. The boat rocked and swayed worse than it had before, and at some point, I was sure we'd gone under, buried into the deep sea, never to see the sun again. We held on to whatever we could as water trickled through the sealed door and started pooling up on the floor. Slowly but steadily, the storm started to pass, the boat regaining its level status along the water. The darkness outside faded into a dark red. Once it was possible to stand with relative ease, we emerged from the cabin and walked up to the deck. "Everyone okay?" asked Josie. "I think I'm gonna," Frank replied, and promptly ran to grab the edge of the railing and vomited yellow bile into the water, his stomach empty of the food from before. "My ribs got a beating, but I don't think anything's broken," I said. "What about you?" "I'm fine, just some bruises." "Look," Josie said, walking to the other side of the boat. On the horizon, we saw the evening sun illuminating a crimson glow behind a small town some 500 yards away. "Frank?" Josie called out. "Yeah," he replied through thick phlegm that sounded like it was stuck to his throat and running down his nostrils. "We made it." We docked at the unfamiliar town and found a small hotel. Probably the only one there, just a quick walking distance away. Once we got our phones dried off, Josie's seemed to be the only one that still worked. As she looked up our location, she nearly dropped the phone on the ground. I don't know how, but we're quite far from home," she said, her voice produced in quick breaths. "How far?" Frank asked. "Some 480 miles away." We checked and double-checked her phone, but she was right. Somehow, we'd ended up nearly 500 miles down the coast into a small fishing town. We were so tired that we decided to get some sleep before giving the bad news to Josie's dad. The next morning, Josie called him up and explained the situation, giving him the simple version. A storm had hit us, and after we got out, we'd arrived here. I could hear the screams he gave her through the phone. Apparently, he was sure we'd driven the boat all the way to this ghost town in the middle of nowhere and docked it there, just to spite him. Josie didn't respond to him much, only apologizing and telling him to come pick us up. A day later he arrived, furious with us, and especially Josie. Once we showed him the boat, I thought he was going to burst into 1,000 tiny pieces, for I'd never seen a man so angry before. Although I think he overreacted, it was true that the boat was in shambles. There was water damage through the interiors, most of the equipment was shot, and large scratches were present along the exterior's white paint. Josie begging him not to drive the boat back home, but he insisted, not hearing a word his daughter was saying. We drove his car and arrived home that night. As promised, me and Josie went out for a beer a few weeks later after her dad had settled down enough to let her out of the house. We went through the events of the trip in great detail, confirming to each other that it did really happen. Although we disagreed on one thing. Josie still thought that the spirals were just magma turned rock, and the whole thing was just extremely bad luck. According to her, we got held up by a superstorm, or a hurricane, that moved our boat on top of an active underwater volcano. And then got hit by that same storm later as it moved across the ocean at miraculous speeds. Her theory was that the storm moved us along with it, making it possible to traverse such tremendous lengths with ease. But Josie didn't see what had been underneath us. Theory was that I saw was simply lava cooling down as it emerged from the ocean bed. But she hadn't seen it blink. Frank, of course, seen it as well, but I haven't heard from him much after the incident. According to his mom, he's been cooped up in his room, drawing yellow circles on black pages. He told her that he needed some time to think.